Hey now, it is Dan Aberhart here, and welcome to the Growing the Future podcast, where we talk to folks who like to innovate, collaborate, and transform the agricultural industry. Thank you so much for joining us for Season 5, Episode 7. I first had the opportunity to meet the individual that I'll be speaking with today at the Agricultural Manufacturers of Canada conference in Banff, Alberta in late 2022. I loved his story of entrepreneurship and the solutions that his company provides to help farmers produce more with less when it comes to harvest time. But before I introduce today's esteemed guest, I would like to remind you to check out the Aberhart family of companies online, starting with aberhartfarms.com, where we grow food to feed the world in Langeberg, Saskatchewan. suregrowth.ca, where we offer precision agronomy consulting services. convergencegrowth.com, where we accelerate solutions across food, health, and agriculture. And aberhartagsolutions.ca, where we deliver one-of-a-kind fertility solutions of the future to your farm. And don't forget to get notified about our new episodes by signing up for our newsletter, growingthefuturepodcast.ca. My next guest has an agricultural background spanning more than 2.5 decades. He has over 20 years in leadership and presidential positions in Lima Grain Canada Seeds, Film Bios, Novozymes Bioag, and he has a passion for biologicals, which we'll talk about. His work in the agricultural industry has spanned North America, South America, Australia, Europe, and Asia. Is kind of an international dude, and he is the president of Redekop Manufacturing. Today, we are going to talk about his journey, his career in agriculture, how he got involved in his own company, and some of the solutions that Redekop provides to producers now and in the future. Welcome to the show, Trevor Thiessen.
Thanks so much, Dan. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks.
It is going to be a great conversation. There's so many areas that I'm interested to talk to you about. But give us a little bit of a background of your journey in agriculture and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I would love to say like I had this master plan to be an agriculture guy from the beginning, but I wouldn't say that is the case. I was fortunate enough to come from a family that had some ag roots. I was born on a farm, but that lasted about 2 years, and then my parents lost the farm. So it's very disingenuous to me to say that I'm a farm kid. 2 years doesn't really make me a farm kid. I didn't have to rogue any fields or feed any pigs. We had a pig farm. So I went to university to be honest, to be a banker. I studied finance and took marketing as a second major and thought that was the path for me. I was pretty clear on that, but I couldn't get a job. And I'd say the best thing that ever happened to me was not getting a job in finance, not getting a job as a banker, because a young company called Film Bios kind of gave me my first crack at a real career job. I didn't know much about the ag industry at that point in time, didn't know much about biologicals for sure, but Film Bios was a real pioneer and innovator in ag biological products started in the 1980 actually. And so in the early 90s, I joined them to be a market analyst and help them kind of plot new paths to new markets. And within 6 months, I just fell in love with the industry. I remember John Cross, who was the founder of Film Bios, used to walk the halls. He was a passionate Welsh guy and just had this crazy love for farming and agriculture. And he would come into my office and slap me on the back and say, Trevor, you should consider yourself to be the luckiest man in the world to serve farmers every day you wake up. And he said, it's the most noble profession. It's one of the oldest professions. And that's our job, is to help farmers produce more. And at first you hear that a couple of times, you're like, whatever, this guy's just telling me a story. But over time, it just kind of became part of what I believed. And the more farmers I met, the more time I spent in the industry, the more I just knew this was a career for me. And over the years, I've had a number of chances to leave agriculture, job offers that would have taken me away, yeah, I just never left. I just found this to be the place that I made a decision to commit to this for the rest of my working career. Well, probably the rest of my life. I'll always probably be involved in agriculture in some way.
When you look back on that early career in biologicals, how do you feel that biologicals has impacted the industry from then and now?
Yeah, biologicals have had this fascinating history. Like if you go back, way back, there was this wave of work that was done by, if you take Bayer and BSF and Syngenta and all their predecessor companies before this mass consolidation that happened in the 80s and 90s of all those companies, where you have Herbst and Agrivo were still company names that we remember. A lot of those companies were working on biologicals in the late 70s and early 80s. I think a lot of people thought there was potential for it. It was a real struggle. But if you remember in the 80s, the cost to do a DNA sequencing was not a few $100s or a couple bucks like it might be today. It was tens of thousands of dollars. And so the technology we had available to us was really tough to innovate at the pace we needed to kind of get good traction. And I think that kind of lost, a lot of those big companies lost interest at that point in time. They just kind of backed off. But if you look at some of the patents and the research literature and the papers that are out there, you'll find lots of work being done in the 70s and 80s. Of course, biologicals go back like probably 200 years. I think the first inoculant, we bought a company in the United States as part of that Phil and Bias journey. And we found this like little archive from 1912. It was the Salesman's Manual to Selling Rhizobial Inoculants. And they had this little container of rhizobial inoculant, this little tin box, looked like a snuff box, right? Like a little, and that was their sample box that the sales guys would hit the road with. And it's interesting, with the cost of a soybean inoculant or a pea and lentil inoculant today is less than $2 an acre. The cost that they were selling it for back in 1912 in their manual was $2 an acre. It's unbelievable to me that there was no price inflation in the inoculant space. So there's a long history of inoculants. And unfortunately, there was this era where a lot of kind of people released stuff that wasn't ready for market. And we got this reputation of, the Australians call it muck and magic. We call it foo-foo dust or snake oil products. And all that stuff kind of left a real bad taste in farmers' mouths, because you had these salesmen coming along with their truck and saying, hey, put this on your crop. It's going to give you 20% yield increase. It's going to cure disease, save the world, whatever story they got told. And it just didn't happen. So I would say when I joined the industry in the early 90s, we were coming out of the worst of that. Like, I think a lot of those guys had disappeared. Phil and Bias was a research-based company. We started in 1980, and it wasn't until about 1989 that we actually sold our first product. It was a partnership with Sask Wheat Pool to sell a nitrogen inoculant for pea and lentil. And over the years, we developed more and more products. Our real main product that people might remember was a product called Jumpstart, which was a phosphate inoculant that you would put on, and it could make more phosphate available because we didn't discover actually Ag Canada. It's a great story of Ag Canada back when Ag Canada was an innovation engine, not a research. I don't want to be bad mouthing Ag Canada, but they've lost some of their innovation capacity over the years. But they developed this, they discovered this phosphate solubilizing bug called Penicillium bali. And a guy named Reg Kusi was a researcher, and he worked out of the Lethbridge Ag and I think Brandon Ag research stations for Ag Canada. And Phil and Bias licensed that, worked with Dow Agriscience at the time, Dow Elanco later, to bring that product to market. And it was probably a 10 plus year journey to get that commercialized. There was lots of formulation issues and delivery issues. Can I tell like a couple of funny stories?
Absolutely. Please do. This is great stuff.
So one of the first formulations of that product was hilarious. So, to keep biologicals alive, they're living organisms. And so, we had this kind of bad packaging that was like a foil pouch that had to be kept frozen just before use. And of course, it had a green dye, like Ag Canada or CFIA made us put a dye in it so that, when it was treated seed, you would know, just like your seed treatments today, right? All have to have a dye in it. So we used a green dye. And this guy decided to open the pouch with his teeth. Not all farmers follow the instructions, but he ripped open this pouch with his teeth and inhaled this dust. It was like a powdery dust of product. But the dye doesn't activate until you put water to it. So he calls into the company like, what should I do? Well, you just go to the hospital, just get checked out. Like, I'm sure you're going to be fine. It's like not going to harm you. But on the way to the hospital, he decided he had to stop at the bar to get a beer because that's the logical thing to do on the way to the hospital. And as he's drinking his beers, he starts to sweat. And as he's sweating, now all this dye that had been powdered around his face starts to turn green because the water is mixing with the dye. So then he quickly rushed himself to the hospital because now he was panicking because he was turning green like an alien. But anyway, like the formulations, and man, like the journey was fantastic. I loved, from business learning perspective, I started with the company. I was like, I think employee number 20. We really weren't making a ton of money. We were struggling with production, struggling with formulations. It was all kind of new stuff. We were just developing the leading edge of all these things. Because this, taking a product, growing it up, like you have to ferment it, then you have to like take all the water out, put it into a way that the farmer can use it, keep it alive, make sure it's compatible with chemicals, all those challenges. Like at one point we were distributing our product in freezer bags with dry ice to the dealers. They'd have 48 hours to put it onto the seed. We were buying freezers for farmers and dealers to store the product on their farms and retail locations, like all kinds of crazy solutions. But yeah, it was a great journey. And like the things that I learned through that process from a business perspective were fantastic. The things I learned about selling and marketing and making sure that what we were doing was what was right for the farmers, not just what we thought was right. That was one of the things I really appreciated about. I had a great boss there when I started, and then his name was Sandy Gleddy, and then John Cross, the founder. They just were so passionate that we should never sell to the farmers unless they had a need. And on that, one of the best examples of that was when I was sales manager at a later point. I had one of my sales guys come up to me and say, "Hey, look, I got a real problem. I was at a farmer meeting. There's about 20 guys there. They represent about $500,000 of my sales," which was a lot for us back in the day. And he said, they all had drought, like 2 years of drought in this area. And, I don't know how much the listeners know about nitrogen inoculants, but if you have drought for a couple of years and you've applied nitrogen, the inoculants the plant's kind of lazy. It'll take the easiest form of nitrogen. So it won't form a nodule with the inoculant. It will just use the background available nitrogen. So if you've applied a lot, haven't had a crop, haven't used up some of that nitrogen, there's going to be a lot of background nitrogen. So our sales guy, Kevin, just said, "Hey, look, I don't think you guys should use our product this year. Like it's not going to nodulate for you. You're not going to get a benefit. You're just going to waste your money. Just top dress if you run out of nitrogen because you have a bunch of background nitrogen, you probably should be okay." And he called and he was really worried about it. And because it was so wired into our company's DNA that was the right thing to do for a farmer, that, we celebrated that. We didn't get upset about that. We just said that was great. And by doing that, I think you build trust with your customer base, and farmers have a tough time, and it's always hard when you go do a farmer presentation and they say, "Hey, look, if we did everything that all you guys come and tell us to do, we would get 250% yield increase."
Yeah.
You're 100% right. I mean, we can't all be right. So, it was a great journey, and those products are still on the market today. I'm still connected with a lot of my old colleagues and some people in that industry. And I remember one years later, we got bought by a company called Novozymes, which is a world's largest enzyme producer, which opened up all kinds of international doors for us. And you said in the introduction, talked about Asia and Europe and places that I've worked. But I remember going to India to celebrate with our team over there. We had about 10 or 12 guys selling in India and most of that continent. And we were celebrating our 1,000,000th farmer. And I remember calling John Cross when I got back, and I said, "John, your dream of reaching 1,000,000 farmers, we did it." I was so happy to be able to kind of share that with him. No, in India, it's easy to sell to 1,000,000 farmers. You barely dipped your toe in the water there because they have 500 million farmers or something crazy like that. But yeah, it was a great experience.
What did you learn, as takeaways as a market analyst, trying to figure out the market? Because I see so many companies trying to get to market, but they seem to miss the mark, or they don't talk to the check writer, or they fall in love with their dream and they can almost see nothing else. What did you really learn in that process?
Yeah, well, and of course, we for sure made a lot of mistakes, and even to this day, we're still making mistakes, thinking we've got great products, and everyone should just want to line up and buy them.
Yeah.
I think what I learned was, patience is important. Like, don't rush it, and don't think that you have to get it all done today. Like, there's always this sense of urgency and panic. And there's a couple of things, like I remember launching a product where it was a granular based inoculant, and I wasn't the only person making the decision, but we got a little excited. It looked good in testing, but we scaled it up and we sent out tens of thousands of bags of this stuff. And what was happening is we hadn't tested real field conditions, and it was bridging up in the seed tanks overnight. So when the moisture, we seed into pretty cool conditions around Saskatchewan and the prairies, and the moisture was causing it to just turn into a brick. And we had guys just pissed at us because they had to chisel this stuff out. They were climbing into their tanks and literally chiseling it out. And I just learned, going fast doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win. It just means maybe you should slow down, because you need to test another year or two. And the sales setbacks you get from going too quick might offset any gains you might have potentially got. So be patient. And most importantly was just listen to farmers. Like, so if they don't, not all of us understand that we have a problem that we need to solve, right? So sometimes someone needs to help us understand that problem. So we go to a doctor. We think we're great. We go to the doctor. He's like, probably not doing so good, Trevor. You should probably lose a few pounds or something, right? But, so I think in the same context in agriculture, like we still need to listen to what the farmer is saying is happening on his farm and why it's happening, and not rush to a conclusion that we've got the perfect solution, but work with them and test it, and alert early that what we test in a lab or what we test in a small field scale doesn't always translate to a farmer's field. And so we started developing a program where in the biological space, we would test on field scale size. So once we got past an early screen in the labs or in a small plot research, we have a 1 meter by 5 meter strip replicated over multiple sites. And you need to do that for lots of reasons, registration, et cetera. But we quickly moved to doing 80 acre to 100 acre tests with farmers and said, look, just split a field for us. And we saw noticeable differences there that we would have never seen in small plot, because the way a farmer seeds, the way that his land reacts, the variability across a field was something we could observe and measure much easier than the rest. And we were doing this before we had yield monitors. This was all with weigh wagons and old school. We didn't have to get out with like a sickle or anything, but it feels primitive relative to what we can do today for sure. So yeah, patience and listening. I think those are two, market development things that I learned early, luckily, and it saved us a lot of time and pain later on.
What a fantastic education for everything that you did. After that, it's always good to get an education on somebody else's dime, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I said, my partner and I bought Redekop when I was in my mid 40s, and, he had spent some time with CNH and FlexiCoil and, some big, large companies. And I had worked for some larger, worked for Monsanto for a while. And you don't appreciate, I think, until you're running your own business with your money, just how valuable those lessons that you learned that someone else paid for, that allowed you to screw up without maybe losing your house. I remember John Cross, the guy who founded Film and Bias, he would speak. He was a fantastic speaker, just very gifted. And we would do these little series and seminars and do these road shows, and he'd tell the same jokes 8 times in a row. You'd still laugh. I don't know. He just had great delivery or something, but he would talk about rat sweats as an entrepreneur. He said, you farmers have this huge stress and pressure, and you get these rat sweats. And he said, rat sweats, that's the sweat you get in the middle of the night when you wake up and you don't know how you're going to make payroll, or you don't know how you're going to pay your fertilizer bill. And I never understood it, because I'd always been just paid a wage to do my job. And then you buy a company, and about 2 years in, I just remember going, okay, I get it. I understand what this rat sweat concept is. Like, I'm panicking, because the first 4 or 5 years buying a company, I mean, you're all in, like, you've put everything on the line. It's a bit of stress for sure.
Isn't it fascinating too? You forgive every boss you ever had for their neuroticism, knowing that, hey, behind that, there was 100 things that was pressing on them that there's no way to understand as an employee until you live that reality. But you sound like you have a passion for biologicals, and obviously you were very successful in your career and likely well compensated, and likely could have finished out your career as an employee. Why is it that you decided to jump into the entrepreneurial ocean, as it were?
Well, there's probably a couple of factors. I'd say the number one factor was probably work-life balance for a family. Like, I had been traveling like a lot. I was based in Saskatoon, but was running a global business. We had 2 plants in South America, 4 in the US. We had Asia, Europe. So I was gone all the time. And it's a great job. Like, I loved it. I loved the thrill. I worked with incredibly smart people and met amazing people throughout my career. But, when your 8-year-old son is at home and your wife calls you and says, Parker's praying that you get a new job so you can just come watch a hockey game, you're like, oof, all right. Like, what's important here? And so I would say that was probably one of my number one factors, was just to find a switch to be home more. My kids were at an age where I could still have an influence as teenage boys, that I thought, okay, well, let's take this opportunity. My partner is great guy, Dean Meyerly. We've been friends for 30 plus years. And, we had talked a number of times about different business opportunities. So it wasn't a crazy concept when he called and said, hey, the Redekop family are interested in selling, but I can't do this on my own. He's an engineer, very competent, extremely talented technical guy, also a good, manager, but he just said I could really use someone who has marketing and sales skills to partner with me. And so that opportunity to work with a guy that I knew and trusted, who was at about the same life stage as me, that I knew we had shared values and shared, kind of life experiences, that was another great kind of opportunity presented. And I'm not going to lie, I had bought a number of companies as part of my journey at Novozymes, and realized that I was only getting paid incrementally more, but I was making a lot of people very wealthy. And it seemed like there was a disproportionate amount of work that I was doing, and these guys were sailing off into the sunset. I thought this, and quite literally, the one guy said, I said, what are you going to do? We just bought your business for $40 million. And he's like, yeah, I think I booked a sailboat for the next 4 months. I'm just going to sail. And I'm like, all right. So yeah, there's this opportunity to build something of your own that's yours. And even though I would argue compensation wise, it was probably safer and more secure getting paid by a big multinational. And I wouldn't even say that we're still taking home maybe some of those same numbers. Like, from a cash flow perspective, we're just pouring everything back into Redekop at this stage. But the reward and the ability to build the business on the values and the principles that we find important, and to do it at the pace that we want to do it at, not beholden to quarterly earnings reports or monthly stockholder reports, which, man, that changes how you run your business. Like, when your boss in Denmark, who knows nothing about ag, calls and says, we've got to make the quarterly numbers, what can you do to push another couple $1 million? You're like, but that doesn't make sense. Like, no one's going to seed for 4 months. So yeah, all those kind of factors lined up, and I was ready. Probably one of the, we did a huge deal with Monsanto. It was my last big deal at Novozymes, where Monsanto took over the sales and marketing. It was a large transaction, hundreds of millions of dollars for them to get the marketing rights to our products. And I just said, I love the sales and marketing. And if Monsanto's going to do all the selling, and I just have to manage the relationship with Monsanto, that didn't feel like as much fun either. I found great joy in meeting farmers, and I had to deal with all my teams, no matter where I was. You can have me come to a grand opening of something in Vietnam or wherever, I'll come, but we have to go talk to farmers. I can't just be like some meeting in a hotel or an airport lobby or something. I just want to get out into the field. And those are my best memories and best experiences of that time. And so I could see that slipping away as it became more of a corporate managing relationship, Monsanto to Novozymes, which are two very different cultures. So yeah, all those things kind of led to the decision. And then Redekop family, I thought, had done a great job of building a good foundation, but had let it slip due to a lot of, good and other. They lost their whole production facility to a fire in 2011. And so the owner was about 72 at the time. He said, I can't do it. I can't rebuild. And, so it took about 3 years to kind of close the deal with them. But 3 years later, we took it on and said, well, we can rebuild it. And we've got enough energy left to try and take a run at it. So yeah, that's what we did.
To your point about getting to a certain echelon corporately and having more disconnect with the farmer, isn't that ironic that the bigger position, the more important position you would take in a company, the less contact you have with producers? Because I find going to some of these seminars, dealing with some of the folks that are starting companies in agriculture, you just know there's no contact with the farmer, and they've never talked to the farmer, and there's no way that you can compensate or you can extrapolate with calculus or algebra or physics or any other science what the farmer is dealing with on a daily basis for the things that you think will fix their problems.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I grew up in the Western Canadian ag industry. So I would say I could stay out of the fields for quite a while and still have a pretty good appreciation when someone brought up an issue from a Western Canadian. But, I remember selling in Asia, and I had no understanding of the Asian farmer experience. And two quick stories there. I remember we were selling a product into India, and I got to go over there. I think it was my first or second trip to India. And I said, okay, I got to meet some farmers who are using the product. I just want to kind of talk to them. You walk out into a field course all through a translator, but it's very traditional Indian garb. This farmer comes, he's got the white turban and the diaper. I call it. It's not a diaper. It's probably not to be offensive. I just don't know what it was. It looked like a diaper. But, he comes up, and when he found out that I was the president of the company that was supplying him the product, I actually got a hug from him. And then I asked why he was so happy. And he said, your products help me produce enough food to sell on the market, not just to feed my family. And that was the first time that had happened in a number of years for him. And this is a guy who farmed maybe 4 to 5 acres, very small field. His whole family was involved. And you just started to appreciate that his struggle. I've never had a Western Canadian farmer hug me. I don't think I ever will have a Western Canadian. Not that I'm asking for it for anyone listening. That's not my desire. But just the impact that we could have on that agricultural environment, and to understand his struggle. I don't think, I can appreciate that as a guy who grew up with so much. I have more than I need. I've always had more than I need. And there are farmers who really struggle, but look, let's be honest. Most of our farmers in North America are doing okay. There are a lot who have bad years, understand that, but nothing like what this Indian guy was going through. And then on a different trip, I visited a farm in Vietnam that was a lime producer, and it was a 5-kilometer ride through the bush on a trail on the back of a little moped. If you can imagine, a Vietnamese guy who wasn't a big guy sees me. I'm 6'3" and about 270 pounds. And he goes, I gotta double this guy all the way through the bush. But it's a pretty comical scene. Luckily I hung on tight. But, we get to his little orchard of limes, and, he was talking about the product and how it was helping him, with disease. It was a disease product that we were selling to him. And then I asked him how much he made on these limes, and it was like the equivalent of about 50 cents for a bushel of limes. And like I knew what we were paying in the stores, and it wasn't anywhere close to 50 cents. And you realize that, man, this guy is struggling just, and he had nothing, but he was so happy and just so like his life was good, and he fed us and he wanted to introduce us to his kids. And, it was a really neat experience for me, but it also just gave me this broader concept of what food production is around the world and how it's very different. But at the same time, the farmer is the same. Like a farmer here who might have 30,000 acres. I just managed to go to an event where Christian Hebert talked, who's got a large farm down by Moosomin, Saskatchewan there. And, his passion for the land and his passion for stewardship and his passion for the next generation and all the things that are important to him on this huge farm, which would be a incomprehensible thing to this Indian farmer, was no different than the Indian farmer's passion for the stewardship, his family, the next generation who was going to farm that land. And that's this cool common thread that I've seen around the world on farmers, is their love for the land. And so, when I think back to John's words about we should consider it an honor to serve these guys and to help them produce more food. I wake up every morning really grateful that I've had a chance to help farmers. It's a real privilege for me.
Well, and isn't that a fascinating juxtaposition to consider this East Indian farmer who for the first time was able to sell some produce on the market and better his standard of living? Well, what Christian's doing with all of his management and the growth in their family of companies is he's able to give back in a very meaningful way to the community so that he can foster the community so that he can have more high quality people come work at his business, because it's an attractive place to raise your kids and have them in sports and go to school and enjoy all the extracurricular activities that we enjoy, the great outdoors in Saskatchewan or on the prairies. But not only that, too, he's got the means and the ability and the time to invest in advocating for agriculture on a regulatory national level, which, so that's a really interesting analogy. I like that. Tell us about the first few years at Redekop. What did that look like when you started?
Yeah. So, we bought the business. The family kept kind of a custom manufacturing part of it, and we just bought the egg product line and the egg business. And so we ended up with 15 employees, no building. We had a couple of shacks and 2 coverall buildings that had been converted into production facilities after the fire. And so the first couple of years was all about rebuilding. And what Dean and I decided to do was to sit the team down and just say, okay, look, we're here, and you've been on kind of a neutral to downward slide for 3 or 4 years since the fire, and we're going to turn that around. And like I'm kind of a fan of Jim Collins' books and Built to Last and Good to Great and Great by Choice books. And Jim Collins, now apparently I'm old because I didn't realize how old those books are. But they're probably 20, 30-year-old books. But the principles are still very good. And for anybody who's listening to this and has read them, you'll know one of his principles is like these BHAG principles, like a big, hairy, audacious goal. And so we threw that out to the team and said, hey, look, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we're going to be like 5 times this size in 5 years. Like we're going to really turn this around. And the purpose wasn't to just set a monetary target. The purpose was to say to the team, look, we're going to kind of break through this cycle and we're going to turn this thing around. We're going to invest in it. So that's what we started doing. Quickly realized we needed to put some infrastructure in place. So we, bought a building and started assembling that. It took about a year to get that up and running. That was an important piece. We needed an office and a place to work. But then, we saw our production systems, our logistics systems all needed to be transformed. So we started hiring good people to kind of work on that. Didn't put a lot of emphasis on sales. Back to my point about be patient and listen and go slow. We put a lot of emphasis on getting the things that were broken right, so that as we scaled, we wouldn't be tripping on ourselves over and over again. Again, back to this incredibly I probably owe some people millions of dollars for the lessons I learned on their dime, but I'm not likely going to pay you if you're listening. But but we just started on those fundamental pieces. Great people was the foundation. We knew we had to get some great people, and then we put some systems in place. Dean started hiring some engineers so that we could start designing and developing. And what we had done in the roll up to acquiring the business was listed about 4 or 5 different new technologies we thought we could work on. And so Dean instantly started working on that stuff. And I took care of trying to help, on the operations side. And so now this June will be 9 years. We've gone from 15 people to 65 people, and we were fortunate enough to break through our 5x the company, and not quite the timeline we said, but that wasn't important. We changed the culture, and that was the most important part. People got excited about the future. People got excited about growing the company and bringing new products to market. So, but it was a tough slug those first 3 or 4 years. I mean, you're pouring, we had a good banker. The family was, generous enough to kind of vendor finance our purchase. So we had good support from them. Thank them for trusting us. Leo Redekop is a great guy. Him and his wife are just, I have nothing but respect for them. But, you still had to put more money in, and you still had to make payroll. And when your accountant says you've run out of cash again, and you're like, all right, how much do we have to pull? And you call your wife and you say, by the way, stop buying some stuff for a while. And she's like, well, what do you mean? Because, for a number of years, that wasn't ever a conversation we had to have before I quit my, guaranteed paying job. And, but, we got through that. Probably took 3 years, 4 years, maybe, to kind of come through the other side of that. And then, and that's, a very typical entrepreneur story that you hear is it takes those first 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 for some people. But if you can get through that, then it can start to turn around. And Dean developed a new product for us that kind of really took off. That kind of an extension of our concept of helping farmers manage residue on the back of the combine. That was a real breakthrough that started to open up new marketing and sales doors for us in about 2019, 5 years after we bought the business. So,
okay, so you started in 2014.
Yeah.
So you did have the rat sweats then, the odd time.
Yeah, we had more. I still get them, to be honest. I probably woke up. I don't think I've ever woken up at 4 or 5 in the morning as much as I have since I bought this, with no alarm. Just being you're awake and you're like, what am I going to stress about today? So you try and find some balance. It's mostly good. I don't want to make it sound like a horrible ride. I love it, and it's quite enjoyable. I have a great partner, which I think if you're fortunate enough to have a good partner and a co-leadership type model where you can share the stress and you have each other's back. In 9 years, I don't think we've had any major disagreements. Obviously we have different opinions about things, but we respect each other enough. Dean allows me to play in my lane, and I let him play in his lane, and we come together on all the important stuff. And that has made it much easier than I think it would have been if I was doing this on my own, for sure.
Tell us about the company, the products. I'm kind of interested in the Redekop origins as well. So I don't know if you just want to briefly touch on how Leo Redekop got started, what problems he was trying to solve, and where you guys are at now with your product line, and maybe where it's going.
Sure. I think Leo started in the early 80s. And I think a lot of products that we have on the market today in Saskatchewan, that are Saskatchewan companies, it was a farmer who had a problem and said, I can fix this problem better than someone else can. So he gets his welder and his torch out and, bangs together something and he fixes it. Well, Leo was a cattle farmer, who wanted to figure out how to put the chaff back with the straw to feed to his cattle, because he figures all this nutrient in that chaff. I don't want to just dump it on the ground. And the way the combines operated, they dumped the straw below they dumped the chaff below the straw. And so it was hard to pick it up and bale it. So he'd built this little cyclone thing that took the chaff and put it on top of the straw as it was getting laid down for baling. And then he was able to collect more chaff for feeding to his cattle. And then he also built, I think, a chaff cart in there somewhere. And then I don't know exactly what the reason was or the innovation, but he figured out that he could do a better job spreading residue for those people who didn't want to collect it. He kind of built this blower system. And so he started building straw choppers that would spread the straw better. And back in the early 90s, straw spreading wasn't really very common. Like, you either baled it or you just kind of plopped it down on the ground. But as no-till and minimum till started to pick up steam across the prairies and we did less tillage work, the residue management was really important. And so we shifted, I'd say, as a company in the 90s to being pretty much exclusively on the choppers and the straw spreading concept, and had a couple of great innovations and some patents. In the early 2000s, like we were making choppers for a lot of the OEM companies and doing all the John Deere STS chopper production here for them. Of course, like all those OEM relationships, they fall apart at some point because the OEMs think they can do it better than us little guys. But yeah, so that kind of continued on, and really the company rode the wave of this MAV. It's called the MAV chopper, was what they branded it in the 2000s, and rode that wave for a long time. And that was kind of the core product line that we bought when we acquired the business, was this straw choppers. And so I would say when we bought the business, that was the majority. We make aftermarket straw choppers and OEM straw choppers. So we have relationships with companies like Case and Agco where we've produced, they install them in the factory. We produce it for them. We might do some of the design or not the design, depending on how that relationship works. And then if you've got a combine that's got a broken down or a busted up, straw chopper, we can replace that with one of ours. Or if it's not performing because you bought, a lot of our sales come from a guy who buys a bigger header and the existing residue system isn't spreading as wide as he wants, or he's got tougher crop conditions than he might have had when he first bought his combine. Maybe it's a secondhand combine he bought that's not equipped like he wants. And so we can upgrade those straw choppers to do a better job. And it's a pretty simple design. It just, has a kind of fan system in there that blows pretty wide. We can get up to 50 feet plus width. We're working on 60-foot width now that guys are buying 60-foot headers. So that's kind of our focus. And we make blades, and we put a lot of energy and research into long wearing, high, very sharp blades that do a good job of cutting up tough crops. And that's kind of our focus on that side. And then after we bought the business, well, as part of our thinking in 2013, when we were working on the development plan to buy the company, we kind of looked at, there's a whole area happening in Australia called harvest weed seed control, which was this idea that, look, we're already running the combine through the field, and they had all this resistance to ryegrass in Australia. And they're like, we're losing whole fields to ryegrass, resistant ryegrass. There's not going to be a new chemical compound coming because chemicals are incredibly expensive to launch and produce. So what can we do? So they thought, well, if we collected the ryegrass, pulled it off the field, burnt it, or did something with it, maybe that's how we could manage it. So they were using chaff carts that we had made back in the 80s. I said to someone, I guess you could argue we were in harvest weed seed control way back in the 80s and 90s because people were using our chaff carts, but we didn't sell it with that intent. But that's what they were doing. They're collecting the chaff, burning the chaff, or feeding it to sheep and killing it. So as we were looking at products that we could develop, basically what had happened was some guy in Australia had developed, his name's Ray Harrington, and he deserves a lot of credit for the work he did. But Ray had developed a tow behind cart that would mill all the chaff coming off the combine. It was this crazy beast of a thing with a diesel engine attached to it. And, and Dean looked at it and said, look, we could probably do a more elegant version and just mount it to the combine. We already make a chopper. We could just kind of integrate that whole thing. And so we started working on that and did some development work. And in the meantime, there were some other companies who also had the same idea to integrate into the combine. So we can't say we were the only ones. We weren't unique there. But so that's what we did. We launched that product in 2018, kind of a soft launch. In 2019 was our first full year of sales. Started with John Deere And the concept is really simple. We basically have three streams coming through a combine, right? So we have the grain that we want to keep that goes up into our tanks. And then we have the straw and we have the chaff. And in that chaff, when we're harvesting that crop, we're also picking up the weed seeds that stayed on the plant and can make it through the combine. And, as long as you're doing a good job of separating in the threshing process, we'll put most of those weed seeds into the chaff. A little bit goes into the straw, but that's only 1 or 2%. Most of that weed seed is in the chaff. So we separate the straw and the chaff, and then we put the chaff through a milling system that basically just pulverizes the weed seeds that are in that chaff. We can kill up to 99% of those weed seeds, depending on the type and the conditions, as long as we can harvest it. So now if the farmer has all the weeds in his fields are lower than he's cutting, or they've dropped to the ground, of course, we're not going to help with that. But if we can put them into the combine, then we have a really good chance at killing them. And so this product has really taken off. Australians are probably running somewhere in the range of about 40 to 50% of all combines are becoming equipped with these kind of mill systems. And we're seeing lots of interest in other parts of the world, and it's starting to take off here in North America. We're selling a lot more than I thought we would this year. So it's good. But it's a pretty cool concept. Farmer doesn't have to do anything different. He just mounts a piece of equipment to his combine. He still runs harvest like normal. Doesn't have to get his sprayer out and do some unique pass or put some weird biological or chemical down. It's just part of his normal process.
Well, I'm just wondering a little bit about, as a market analyst, you must be considering how big this market is and how much this could work for anybody on any given Sunday in North America. How, are we going to hit 40 or 50% within the next, 3 to 5 years of this technology?
I don't know about that. Like, I think Australia is a bit unique. The ryegrass problem really spread quickly for them, and resistant rye kind of got away from them. I would say, look, if 20 to 25% might be an interesting number to kind of play with, it kind of comes down to this. Like, it's one more tool for the farmers to use to manage their weed problems. So we need to use rotation. We need to use a chemical rotation. There's other agronomic practices that they like. Cover crops as an option. There's all kinds of things that farmers can explore for weed management. This would be one more tool. And, the cost of it is approximately $4 an acre. Like, when you take the cost of the capital purchase, depreciation, maintenance, fuel consumption, because it is using more horsepower. So it does, take more fuel, right? But at $4 an acre, you say, okay, well, what are my other options? If I can control a huge amount of my weeds, it also controls all your volunteers, right? So one of our biggest weed problems, if you look at the data from, Ag Canada and other researchers on weed science in Western Canada, our more biggest weed quickly moving up a resistant weed is canola. Because we grow so much canola, you try to get your canola out of your pea field or lentil field. It's a problem these days. So we're controlling the volunteer. We're controlling the weeds that are kind of there at harvest time. And if that starts to fit into guys' operations, like, we have a couple customers who have 6 combines who have this on only 2 of their combines. And so those 2 combines run in the toughest, weediest fields. They open up the fields because that's a lot of times where your kochia or your other problem weeds are starting to creep in, is on the outside perimeter. So they'll open the fields with these 2 combines. And then the rest of the field, which is pretty clean, they just use their other 4 machines. So I could see that being more of a common practice here, where we're using it as a tool in the problem areas. And so maybe that's going to be only 20 or 25% of the combines, not maybe the 40 to 50% like we see in Australia. Unless we start to see resistance really creep, which is a problem. Like, glyphosate resistance in parts of the US is a real big issue. Where water hemp and Palmer amaranth are some of the bigger weed problems that the US market is struggling to try and figure out how to control those weeds. So in those markets, maybe we have a high percent. On average, maybe it's 20%. That would be a good number. I'd be happy with 20%.
Well, speaking of big, audacious, hairy goals here, big, hairy, audacious goals, I guess the term is. Looking back, what difference did that make that you set that big, hairy, audacious goal, and did you reach it in the end? To everybody's shock.
Yeah, so we did reach it a year or two after, 2 years after we said we would, but the difference was that people knew that the status quo wasn't acceptable. And one of the comments we made was like, if you want safety, security, you want everything to be the same every day you come to work, this isn't the right place for you. And I didn't say that to the people to scare them. I said that so they understood that the job you have today probably isn't going to be the job tomorrow. Now, for very specific individuals, I would translate that to say, look, today you're doing 6 jobs. If we grow this like we said we're going to grow this, you'll be able to focus on what you like to do, not what you have to do.
Good point.
And that was a selling point for individuals. Some people love growth for the sake of growth. They just love being part of that ride. So that they weren't a challenge. But some people who were like, oh, I don't know about this, that's where you kind of say, well, what do you love? Because we can, as we grow, we'll try and design the job for you that you love, but we need to grow to do that. Today you're going to have to do these other 5 things. And that's become a reality for a lot of the people here is they're doing the stuff they love to do and they're good at. Cause that's where most of us are happiest when we're doing that, right? Like if when I think back to the early days here and there was a day the whole septic tank went out. We don't have city sewage here. So Dean and I are like looking at each other going, okay, septic tank's down. We don't know how to weld, so we can't go do that job and make a welder go do it. Those guys are doing what they're supposed to be doing. I guess that's you and me going and fixing the septic tank. So that's what we did in the mud and rain and yeah. So now I don't have to do that. Thankfully, we can call a guy to come do that. But I think that was a real win for the team. So looking back, setting the goal was important to just transform the culture, transform the thinking, and get us out of the rut of saying we can't do anything. We're just always going to be a small little company. Maybe we'll be 16 people, but we're not going to grow. So when people look around and see we're now putting up our 3rd, and then this fall we'll start our 4th building project, like a major building project. So for them to see this continual investment in the company and new products, we started with one sales guy, Frank. He's been around forever. Great guy, but Frank and I couldn't do it all on sales. So we now have 14 people selling around the world, helping us out. And so, yeah, tons of fun.
That's exciting. So what is your next big, hairy, audacious goal, Trevor?
Yeah. So I think, so numbers are always kind of hard. Like, goals are, we don't like focusing on the money side because the money can kind of mislead you to think that that's the most important part. It's a measure of success. It shouldn't be the definition of your success. I think, I would say the goal right now is to try and get as many markets in the world, benefiting from this mill and harvest weed seed control technology as we can. So we started working with a group in South America. So we're testing in Brazil and Argentina right now. We're working hard to get the European market opened up and the North American market opened up to kind of get it to, hopefully half or even a little more than half of what the Australian market is. So our goal is in the next 5 years to, we could see 4 or 5 times the size of company that we are today. But that should be measured by really happy, satisfied farmers who are seeing a benefit from this in South America, all of North America, and Europe. That's really the goal.
So you're going to be sleeping in hotels across the ocean again?
Yeah, probably. But my kids are like, don't want to see me anymore. They're 21 and 19. So I did my time, and now my wife can take the time to come travel with me. So maybe it won't be quite as bad a scenario. So yeah, no, a little bit of travel for sure. But yeah, I'm also building a good team that can also do some of that hard work for us. So I don't have to do all the heavy lifting.
Such a great local success story and so much good content there with the stories that you related about entrepreneurship. And what are the core values of the company that you and Dean live by, that you've really instilled in the culture, that have helped you guys be so successful?
Well, I think, first and foremost, we try to make sure that all the design, development, sales are done with the farmer first mentality. So most of the engineers that we have working for us come from a farm. We always try and find farmer engineer type guys. So if we think about what's practical and usable for them, that makes it much easier for me to go sell to the farmer, because this has been designed with you in mind. So, serving the farmer, as John said, 30 years ago when I started my career, is the most important thing you can do. We've tried to keep that mentality of serving our farming customers and putting their needs first. So that would be one. And for us, it's extremely important to take care of our employees and realize that the money is less important than the employees' health and well-being. And it's a small thing, but it's an example that we share with people. Is when we were broke in the early days and we could barely afford to make payments, and I was still putting personal money in, as was Dean, to keep the thing going, we realized that we had a lot of people suffering and struggling with personal issues, and like every one of us does, right? And I had talked to a number of people who had run companies successfully, and one of the things they talked about was that they had these chaplains, just like a hockey team might have a chaplain or sports team. And I'm like, well, what does this guy do? And he's like, well, when people have a marriage problem, or they are broke, or something bad happened to them, they don't want to come tell their boss. So this chaplain just kind of walks alongside them, directs them to professional counseling if that's what they need. So yeah, we hired a chaplain. And, I would say that when I told the employees about it, I said, our job is to give you a fair wage for what you're doing. So that's one of our responsibilities. We got to give you health and benefits and keep you safe at work. But then there's this emotional and spiritual side of your life that we also want to try and help you with. And so this chaplain is really there to help with that. And I'm one story, because the guy's not here, I can kind of tell it. I won't give his name, but this young kid was working for us, and he punched his dad in the face one night after he had been out partying or drinking, and he was living at home. So he got kicked out. He doesn't want to tell his boss that he punched his dad in the face and got kicked out of his house. But because this chaplain had been hanging around, the first call he made was to this chaplain, and he's available after hours to these guys. And this guy walked him through some steps and helped him, kind of facilitated a discussion with his dad, and they reconciled. And eventually this kid got back on good standing with his family. And that along with about half a dozen or more other stories like that, to be honest, those are the most rewarding parts of it. We've sold a lot of product and we've made some money, and that's all great, and we've built a nice building. But knowing that we've helped enrich the lives of our staff and made their life a better life, and we've given guys career opportunities and put some kids through school and help them get ahead, whether they stay with us or leave us in the future. To me, that's most rewarding. And I'm sure as you look back, and many people who are listening to this, if you look back and you say, what are the greatest accomplishments you've had? Very few of you say, well, we launched a product in 1987 and it was this phenomenal success. No one talks about that. When I think back on my career and I think about all the successes, I go, they all come down to these people. It's always people. It's the friends you made. It's the connections you made. It's when I think about the guys that I helped get to the next level in their career, and the people who helped me, those are the things I kind of brings me joy. The guys like John Cross and Sandy, who gave me a chance as a moronic, 25-year-old marketing guy. Those guys are the impactful thing. So yeah, those values, the value of serving our farmers, but also serving our staff and putting people ahead of profits is really the foundation of who we try to be here at Redekop.
Congratulations. That is a wonderful story. And you just articulate that so well. And
thanks.
I know a lot of folks in business who have teams of people that they're working with. That's where the joy and the benefit comes from. And I've never heard that, having a chaplain in your company, but that is brilliant. And the number one reason that people don't show up for work globally today is mental health. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the number one fire in our businesses is people not
Yeah.
being productive or being able to show up because they're dealing with all kinds of things that we're fortunately a lot more aware of. You know, we're similar ages and vintages, and when we were growing up and these things happened, you were just faulty. You know, you were
Right.
nobody knew what it was, but it was sort of your problem, and now we understand that largely everybody shares in these struggles, and we could all use that. And I'm just wondering if I could get the name and number of your chaplain, if you would be
Yeah.
so kind, that'd be helpful.
For sure. You know, when you start digging into it, there's a lot of companies who use this, and I was shocked when I started. You know, companies like All Weather Windows, Q Line Trucking, which a lot of guys in the ag industry will know that Q Line, J&H Building Supplies here in Saskatoon, and Alliance Energy, they all share a chaplain. They have one full-time guy between the three of them. I talked to Reg Queering from Q Line about this, and he said to me, Trevor, it is the most important business decision I've ever made. He said, I had a guy, traveling home from a shift, and he got hit by a train, and the team was devastated, and we didn't know what to do as managers. Like, I'm not equipped as a manager to deal with grief. That's not my skill set. I can help you balance a spreadsheet, but so he said our chaplain stepped in and came alongside the family. Had no idea how to manage a funeral. They had, no other support in their life. And he said this chaplain was just an amazing support to these people in a time of incredible grief. And even told a story of a guy that one of his truck drivers hit someone on the highway and I think killed her or put her in the hospital. And this chaplain drove out to wherever this truck driver was holed up and sat with him just to comfort him. And like you say, mental health, especially coming out of COVID, like I've just seen so much more stress in people's lives coming out of COVID with this isolation and separation and anxiety about the future. And it's hard for us to have successful businesses without healthy people. And how do we help people get through that? I'm never going to go to school and become a great counselor. So we have to help our teams find the right resources to support them in these like really tough times. Like, and yeah, everyone's struggling. I mean, every company struggles with this. And as individuals, we have to be more honest about our mental health problems. I think, like you said, we just used to bury it or told not to worry about it, fight your way through it. You're broken. But hey, like, yeah, I've had my own problems with mental health and had people not come alongside me with love and gentleness, I might have had a much worse time. So I think that's kind of, you get older and you get a little more philosophical and you realize that, yeah, some of this stuff is way more important than just going and selling 10 more products.
Choppers are important,
Right.
Weed control and managing that straw is important, but these are the things that really have an impact on our lives. And man, you're a great leader. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. It's been an honor, really. And you guys are building something great. I can see that you're going to be highly successful because of all the things that you've learned and applied and have been open to and you built into the culture of your company. So congratulations. And I'm sure you guys are going to have much continued success. So way to go.
Well, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're doing, helping, people like us, get our stories out there. And it's always encouraging to hear other people's stories. And so when people are willing to put that on the air and let us all learn from each other, I think that's awesome. And congratulations on your business as well. It's kind of fun. It's fun growing stuff. And I know you enjoy that as much as all the rest of us. So
we are in the business of growing things for sure. And we're very privileged. I like the words of John Cross that every day we should wake up and be very thankful that we can help a farmer be in this business. I recently had a fellow come on board who wasn't planning a career in agriculture, but is very excited about the agricultural industry. And you just see it through new eyes. You never want that to get old, to recognize that, hey, we're working in a fantastic business. It's an incredibly noble endeavor. It's very important on so many levels. And Yeah, we're very fortunate every day and having a lot of fun. I feel for people that wake up and don't have that level of purpose, and maybe they're working in a shitty machine designed by somebody else that doesn't have, some of the considerations of humanity that you're talking about baked into the cake. So we're in a good spot, and you guys are doing great work, and really proud of you guys, and proud that you could come on the show. And it's going to make for a great lesson for our audience, I know. So thank you so much.
All right, Dan. Thanks.